we are sitting here not because we have it all figured out. We're working on it, but we don't have it all figured out. That should not discourage you from sitting here and joining us tonight. But our rabbis teach that Ein Chacham Kebal HaNisayon, there is no wise person like the one who has experience. And we are blessed with 8 children, 1 son-in-law, 2 grandsons, and we've done a pretty decent job. Not a perfect job, but we've done a pretty decent job. And we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and we have learned to some extent from our mistakes, and we continue to learn. And we are a work in progress, which actually, there's one message that we'd like to convey tonight, is that if there's any takeaway, it's that we as parents have to be a work in progress. And the more that we are a work in progress, the more we are going to better ensure, at least not necessarily ensure, but the more we can contribute to do our part in hoping for a wonderful outcome from our children to the hopes and dreams that each of us have for our children. So it's really about work that a parent does with themselves, for themselves, about everything, as we're going to elaborate on, not just about parenting, but being a work in progress is really the key ultimately to successful parenting.
Good, we can all go home.
We do invite you to submit questions. Those that are present, you all should have our number, so you can send a text or WhatsApp and we'll kind of sort through everything. And those that are on, you can ask also, yeah, correct. And those that are on Zoom, you please submit questions in the chat. We'll try to address some of them towards the end of tonight's discussion. And if they pop up and it fits in, we'll try to address it in real time. And then in our second session next week, we'll try to make sure that everybody's questions are addressed. So we're gonna start with 2 Torah thoughts. I'm gonna share one, and Dena is gonna share one. So
You have a PowerPoint, you have it on?
yeah, I just have part of it. So at the end of, we're familiar with the story of Joseph and his brothers. The brothers sell Joseph into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. He faces a lot of challenge in Egypt. He's accused falsely, he's thrown into prison. Eventually, he's taken out of prison because he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker, becomes the viceroy, the prime minister of Egypt. And sometime later, because of the famine in the land of Israel, the brothers come down to Egypt to collect grain, to provide for their family. And in the process, we read about how Joseph creates a scenario to compel his brothers to recognize the mistake that they made many years earlier. And at one point, Benjamin is taken into an imprisonment, and Judah comes to argue on behalf, to plead on behalf of Benjamin. And in his discussion, in his monologue, which is actually a monologue, he presents the story how our father had 2 sons. One of them was taken away. One of them is no longer here. And if Benjamin is not returned home, who knows what's going to happen to our father? He will go down into the grave, because the nafshay kshura benafshay, the soul of Benjamin is bound up in the soul of Jacob. In other words, these 2 souls are very much bound together.
It's an emotional plea.
It's an emotional plea, and this is kind of the climax. This is his punchline, that the souls are bound up with each other. One of the commentators on the Torah, known as the Baal HaTurim, shares an interesting parallel to a verse in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 15.
So
Go ahead.
Baal Turim's like the way he always explains Torah is he like copy paste, like he wants to see where else in the Torah is this word used. So he finds one other time this word kshura, tied up, bound up, is ever used. in another. So in this context is like their souls are together, father and son. You can't do this. You will destroy my father. And then one other time kshura is used, and it's in this context.
In this context in Proverbs, which it says, Ivelas kshura belev nar, if folly settles in the heart of a lad. So, these words, if folly settles in the heart of a lad, Ivelas kshura, the word kshura means to be tied up, but he draws the parallel that just as Jacob and Benjamin's souls are bound up with each other, so too folly is bound up in the heart of a lad. That is, that when there is folly, when there is struggle within, go ahead.
Folly is like frivolousness or narishkeit or craziness. Like think of young children, teenagers, like they're filled with folly, right? They have all these ideas about what they want their hair to look like, what they want to be when they grow up. Like, just think of like the teenage mind. This is folly. So, it used to be, what did we think of folly? When folly is tied up in the heart of a lad, we had to go back to Proverbs, and it says, spare the rod, spoil the child, teach them well, and then they won't go off of the right path. But what the Balaturim is saying here is, what does he say is the only way, go ahead, to
Go ahead,
confront.
finish the point.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, you're on the
Okay,
roll.
so the only way to confront the folly of a child is if you are bound up with the child. So if you are connected to the child. So the Balaturim, this is ancient. So like today we talk about, people like to say that, some of this conscious parenting or gentle parenting, it's like, oh, so new age. And it's like for what are we doing to the children today by being so soft? But we wanted to bring out this point that once upon a time, this was what Proverbs was telling us, was that this binding up with your child in order to get your child to mature, in order to get your child to be willing to grow up, is they have to be kshura, they have to be connected in this way. So connection is going to be like a big discussion.
A big focus and a big theme of all of the parenting discussion that we're going to have is about that connection. And if we can put ourselves in Judah's mindset, right, watching this story unfold, and he understands the deep connection that exists between father and son, and we can try to bring that into our own experience in relationship to our own children, kind of the feeling we want our children to have in terms of that internal connection, all of this will come to life for us. So that was one Torah thought. And then the second one, sorry,
okay, so everybody likes to make a joke or talk about, there's an aphorism, tsar gidol banim, like the tsar, the pain of raising children. That's what it is, tsar, the pain of gidol, growing children. So really, I've heard it turned on its head from Dr. Russell, Dr. Schusterman Russell, and he says, it's the pain of growing up through your children. That's what it is. That's what this aphorism is talking about. It's not the pain of raising children, but it's the pain of growing yourself through the children growing up. It's you growing through your children. And that really also ties into our theme tonight. Do you want to share a screen here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, why are we here tonight? So,
Maybe you tell us. Everyone can tell us. I
Yeah.
think we're not on that. Is that just going to run on its own?
no, it's,
Okay.
so,
Anyone want to share?
yeah,
why
if
they're
anyone
tonight?
here wants to share, maybe if anybody on the Zoom wants to put in the chat, why are you here tonight? What's the one main compelling reason that brings you here tonight?
I just want to parent differently than my parents.
Okay. Do we have that on the list? Yes.
Our own triggers.
All of
We
us
want a
want our
better
children to have a
life.
better life than we had, or at least as good. Okay.
Cycle breaking.
Cycle breaking. Okay. Anyone on?
I'm very, as you just mentioned, I feel very strongly about how conscious parenting and terror are very much connected. There's nothing that's changed about it. And people have done it for many years more than I have. It's real life experiences.
Okay.
That's really learned.
Okay. So real life experience, learning the connection between the Torah piece and conscious parenting, not like getting away from thinking this is new agey. I think that's really helpful also, because nobody wants to be doing something new, especially when we come from like this long tradition of doing everything a certain way for so many years. It gets very scary, cycle breaking. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm here definitely with open mind, wanting to learn, support my wife, change the patterns also that I was parented.
okay.
We have here on Zoom, learned some of this for my older kids, but wished I'd learned it sooner and now want more info from my younger kids. Great,
Okay.
great. So a few other things that we have here is that we all have dreams for our children, right? We're blessed with children, and we have hopes for our children. And we want to put our best foot forward to hopefully bring to that outcome. What's the second one?
So what do we want from our children, right? We want willingness. We want them to be willing to get up in the morning. We want them to be willing to brush their teeth. We want them to be willing to get out of bed, to listen, to get a job, to, everything could be whittled down to, we want willingness from our children, right? That's what we're really looking for, is for them to be willing to show up as the people they are, willing to be part of our family. Just that functionality that, if I was going to give it one word, I call willingness.
Okay, we mentioned the other one. All of us want our children to have a better life than we had, or at least as good. Children are complex beings, and we only have the knowledge and our experience to use in our influencing of them. And I think that was one of our messages here on Zoom as well. Kids don't come with a manual. We can only pass on what we know. So they don't come with a manual, so we've got to figure it out. And we want to try to do that as best as possible. Good evening. Adding in the burdens of the day-to-day life and physical exhaustion, which, really throughout humanity, people dealt with that, but we live in particularly unique times with the accessibility and internet and information and phones and there's like, who can breathe? Right? And then we have to deal with children, and we want to show up for them in a way that we know more than ever before that we can. And just trying to figure out how to balance all of this stuff is just overwhelming. And then add into that our own triggers, right? All of us have triggers, right? We see what triggers our kids sometimes when we're have patience to look at it, and we have our own triggers. And how do we kind of reconcile our triggers in trying to navigate good, healthy parenting?
And then this is, I think, this is a really important point, is that we have, I feel like there's a different way of speaking to here. It's like more lecture-y, and then to here. So I want to try to keep it here. So we have, I think we live in, I heard it said somewhere, I don't remember where, like, we're very enlightened, but we're not quite there yet. Like, this, because if we were there, Mashiach would be here, right? We wouldn't be in a war, and we wouldn't have famine, and we wouldn't have hunger, and we wouldn't have people struggling. So we're not enlightened completely yet, but we live in times where we can think we are, because things are going so well for us, and we are so privileged, and we have so much information, and we're living in really good times, and things are really going well for us, and it could change on a dime. Who knew we would be in the middle of a war like now? My niece said the other day, she said to her husband, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm reading about the war. She's like, I felt like I should be in curlers and in a house coat, like reading about the war, like where are we? Anyway, so we do live in these really enlightened times. And then we have these, I think what happens with that is we have these really high expectations of ourselves. And we really think that we're going to be the ones to like get it. And I just think it's really, really important that we don't lean into the perfectionism in a whole other area of our lives. Cause like we're kind of running away from perfectionism in one area of our life, right? Like maybe we grew up with parents who wanted us to look a certain way and it was so perfect, or be a certain way, or have manners, right? And we're like, no, we're not doing that anymore because we're letting kids be. But then we're inadvertently becoming perfectionistic in this way too. And that's a real, like, something to really be aware of. So we want to be better, but we have to constantly remember that we're people and we're going to make mistakes, and to be light about that, and not, and we'll talk more about that guilt and everything soon, but we're going into this to get more tools and to do a better job, but we're always going to be struggling. We're always going to be struggling. And what we could hope for actually is having, they say there's like the 80-20 rule. Like if you're a good parent, 80% of the time, you should be really, really happy with yourself. So if 8 out of 10 nights you go to bed and you don't feel like a total idiot or jerk or meanie for how you treated your kid that day, then and you just go to bed with like a peaceful heart, like my kids are happy, even if you did say something you didn't like, you were able to repair it with your child, because maybe you didn't grow up with anyone repairing anything and you went to bed with just very sad feelings inside of you and nobody acknowledged it to you. So if we're just doing that, then we have to give ourselves kudos for that.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to hit the punchline. Yeah, we're going to hit the punchline, and then we're going to kind of build it back up, try to give you some of the background information, and then we'll bring it down into very practical and provide some tactics. And then again, questions along the way, please feel free to ask, or you can say them for the end. So what is the core solution, or what is the core idea? What's the big idea about parenting? It is that children need connection. The most important, right, as we mentioned before, the connection. The most important thing you can do for your child is provide connection. And we're going to elaborate what connection is, but let's look in the Torah for a second. The first time the Torah tells us that something is not good, the Torah tells us, Lo tov hayos ha'adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. In the context where God then goes ahead and creates Eve, Chava. But the Torah tells us what's not good. God created a wonderful world, a beautiful world with everything is good.
Day 2 is good.
And he says, for it was good. Finally, he creates man, and he creates one human being, and he says, it's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. In other words, when we feel loneliness, when we feel disconnected, when we are feeling not understood, not appreciated, not connected, not loved, not soothed, not seen, all of these things which we'll talk about, we're not feeling connected. And that's not good. The opposite of that is that when we're connected, that's good. That's goodness. And from that goodness, everything stems. Want to add anything to this?
Yeah, so I'll never forget where I was sitting in IJP. We were having a professional development day, and the woman, Peggy, had come from Conscious Discipline. Now, this is a woman who's not Jewish, she's Christian, and she, like, I don't know, I felt like she was looking me in the eye, and she's like, what do we want from our children? We want willingness. You know, just what I said to you before, we're looking for willingness. That's really at the core of everything, is willingness from our children, willing to show up, willing to serve Hashem, willing to be a member of society. And she said, willingness comes from connection. And it was like a ton of bricks. It was like, I had studied this in Tanya. I had studied this in Chumash. I had studied this in the story of Yosef. I had studied it, but it didn't, for some reason, she was that messenger to give me that message that connection is everything. Now, just, we're going to get into the brain. It's very important. I always feel like I have to cover the brain states in case people are not familiar with them, but connections outside of the brain make connections inside of the brain. That's how a child's brain grows. So if I am a child and I am playing with rocks in the park, and then I come to school and my teacher has rocks for counting. So I have made that connection that these rocks from the park are now the rocks in my school, and I count them at school, and now I'm going to start counting them in the park. That's just such a rudimentary, basic level of connection. So, they say that if you're friends outside of school with the people that you're in school, that creates more connection for your child. So we know it creates connection because you're actually going to a birthday party, but it's even familiar faces. Like, these are the people that go to my synagogue. These are the people I see in my school. These are the people that come to my house. All of that is connection. All of that is wiring that is literally growing the child's brain. So aside for that benefit, that is actually the benefit. So what you're doing is the way the brain is working is that they are able to, because of all those connections, that is where their willingness comes in, because they feel like it's all, think of it as all these strands that are pulling them to be with those people and do the things for those people and have the willingness to show up as a human in this world that I'm so connected in, because I don't want to pull back, because I'm here. Like, think of just the imagery is that I'm in this world. Like I'm just super connected. So when we have that with anybody, if you think about it, like the people that are willing to show up for you are the people that you have shown that you've been connected with as well. Like that is the most, our basic need is to feel connected. And then really everything kind of just evolves out of that.
I want to, just before we go further, I just want to, for the adult to connect with this idea of needing connection. Sometimes we have to look at the negative to recognize the positive. You know, if anybody who's participating now, think about today. You had moments of frustration. You had moments of discomfort. You had moments of self-doubt. We're sitting in Jeff's place, which is about recovery. People who struggle with addiction. There's shame around that. That's one of the big triggers for addiction, is they feel shame and they feel alone because of their shame. So whenever we're feeling this kind of discomfort, if you drill it down, there's a sense of loneliness there. And when we, you know, thank God we have people in our lives and we have our own hopefully healthy story, or the new stories, the new narratives we tell ourselves to validate that we are worthwhile, even if we made a mistake, even if we woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and so on and so forth. But inherently, even as adults, we're looking for connection that gives us a sense of ease. It gives us a sense of worthiness. It gives us a sense of motivation. So if we can draw that contrast within ourselves and then take these little precious beings that don't have all that complex tools that hopefully we have, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that connection that will help them be at ease, that will produce the willingness that we're so looking for.
Yes.
Can I just ask you a question about connection? If you could define it, are you referring to like safety? There's a relationship, or are you referring to love? Both? Like,
Yes.
Yes.
It's yes and more. But just for fun, let's use the word ahava. The word ahava, which means love. The root of that word ahav means connection, right? So what is love? Love is really about connection. It's about two things being connected. So yes, you are connected when you feel love. You're connected when you're embraced. You feel connected when you're seen. You feel connected when you're spoken to. You feel connected for all of those things. And there are a lot of different ways to create connection. Safety, you mentioned safety, right? So all of those things are all part of connection. Sometimes it's less about what is connection than what is not connection, but it's important to get the whole picture. And we're going to touch on some of these things.
Just very basically, disconnection is, you know, the old timeout, right? Timeout was literally your child is, we won't even talk about why your child was misbehaving, because usually a child is misbehaving is for, you know, not their own problem really. And it's not misbehavior that they want to be doing, but they just can't succeed in the moment, right? So you have a child that is misbehaving, and then to cement that behavior and to rectify the behavior, we put them in timeout, right? So you've
To correct
the behavior, we put them in timeout. So here you have a child who's already flailing, like think of them as, you know, they're just trying to get noticed, and they're just trying to get their needs met. And then what we do is we say, oh, I'm going to punish you for trying to get your needs met because you didn't do them the way I understand them.
And how am I going to punish you? By creating disconnect.
Right. So, and then, well, that's what I meant, is the punishment, is the disconnection is the punishment, as opposed to, you know, time in, which is like, I can see you're trying to ask me something. I could see you really need something. I can see you're really frustrated, whatever it is you're saying to a child. That's connection. That is bringing them back in. You know, a child, you go shopping with a child, and this could be a child of any age, a child that's having a temper tantrum, or even a teenager. You take shopping and she's like nasty to you in the store, like, you're going to buy me this, and oh my God, I hate all your choices, and you know, nothing, you know, you could any age, and then I'm never taking you shopping again, right? That's like the thing that's going to just like eject from our CD-ROM, because that's what we have heard, and that's what we know, to say, I'm never taking you shopping again. But now that we know connection is the most important thing. We can hopefully stop. We'll talk about this, how we get there, but we could hopefully stop ourselves and say, wait, am I disconnecting? So I'm just adding literally fuel to the flame. I am not going in the direction of getting a willingness for my child. I am going in the opposite direction, creating disengagement, disconnection, more anger, more stress, more anxiety, more cycles. Just all of that is happening from disconnecting and saying, I'm never going to take you shopping again.
Maybe
Yeah.
part of what you were saying though is that not only like the discipline setting, but maybe you're doing all the things, you're checking off the list, you're making the dinner, you're packing the lunch, you're checking them in, you're doing all the like the perfunctory actions. You don't necessarily feel like either you are connected to your child feels connected to you. So not only like in how you respond to negative behavior, but maybe you feel like you're doing all the things a parent should be doing, but not necessarily feeling connected deeply. That's also something you would want to create more of. It's doing those things will make connection necessarily. You're doing it out of love, obviously. Why else would you make dinner every night?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially lunch.
Especially lunch. Especially lunch. Okay, so that's a great point. So I was kind of, sometimes you have to bring out the extreme negative in order to see the opposite of it. So someone here she was saying that we also want to do things that deepen a connection. So we have a connection with our child as long as we're not disconnecting from them. And then there's the next step, which is actually creating moments of, silliness, playfulness, private jokes we have between them and, going out one-on-one or whatever it is, reading, letting them lay in your bed with you, making their hair, touching them, all those things that create more connectivity. But I'm literally talking here from we're starting from a point of just not disconnecting, because we are connected naturally with our children.
And I'll also say that there's, when we do live in a world where things need to happen, right? So kid needs to go to school, kid needs to go to bed, kid needs to wake up. I mean, all of this thing needs to happen. And we go to we move into a mode of action, right? We got to move things forward. And it's extremely difficult to move internally within ourselves to be able to focus internally on the child, right? Even if you're not in a movement mode, but the child is misbehaving. So right away we go to, okay, we got a problem here, we got to correct it. And that's normal, right? That's normal that we think that way. What we're understanding now, we're going to jump into some of the brain science and so on, is to understand that maybe those ways don't actually do the trick. Maybe there's something that the child needs that's far more important. And we're going to talk about the fears that we have around this and this idea that we need boundaries and stuff.
Okay, so
All the stuff that we've talked, we're going to talk about all of it.
Okay.
Okay, let's, yeah.
Okay, so I just want to very quickly, most of you, I mean, if you're at IJP, you for sure know this already, but we'll just quickly go through the brain states. So the oldest, the first developing part of our brain is the reptilian brain. That's like the brain that is first developed in your child. It's the animal brain. It says, am I safe? That's AI safe. Am I safe? Okay. That is the survival brain. That's the brain that is going to take you into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Like that is your brain that will develop all of its coping mechanisms based on how it is raised. Okay. So it will go into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze based on stimuli that comes into the brain. It is a natural reaction, but those neural pathways will become cemented more and more and more. They'll become like, they'll become tunnels, basically, the more it needs to react that way. Often it is the nature of a child. There's a nature of a child to fight. There's a nature of a child to freeze. There's a nature of a child to fawn. There's a nature of a child to flee, but some of it gets learned, but some of it just keeps getting cemented the more that has to be used. Okay, so the more fearful I am, the more I have to use those responses. Then we have the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain, and this starts developing as the child, it comes with the child, but it develops more and more. And that's, am I loved? That's the emotional brain. That is when your child, as they get older, you can talk to them a little, but it's all they want to know is if they're loved, if you have that emotional connection, if you say to them, I'm here for you, you're safe, I love you, that is what they want to know. And then you have the prefrontal brain, which is your thinking brain, your executive function. This is the brain which, and that's to ask me, what can I learn from this? So this is this is the only time anyone Now, you cannot be in two places of your brain at the same time, okay? So if you are in fear, then you are boop, you're in your limbic and reptilian brain, and you are not thinking about what you can learn from something. So if you are sad or emotional, you're not in your prefrontal cortex. So you cannot be in both those places at the same time. So you're not making those choices with your thinking brain when you are in your survival brain and in your emotional brain. And that's why it's really important to have mastered skills as an adult to train yourself and to rewire your brain, because if you grew up very unsafe, you're going to constantly be triggered and going back into those prehistoric brains. And then it's really important to have mechanisms, tools, regulation, skills to be bringing yourself up to your prefrontal cortex. Now with children, it's not like, don't bother, we try to rationalize and talk to a child, and when they are not in that space, it just doesn't work. They just need a hug. They just need to be told that they're going to be okay. I literally knew none of this for most of my parenting, but it's just to watch it at work. I have a child that just does not get up well in the morning and is like, and then the breakfast is not good and everything. And then, so I'm like ready to be like, you're going to eat this, and then when I do the like, okay, I know you don't like this breakfast. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just,
Can I tell a story about that?
You can tell. I'm in the middle of telling one story. Okay. So like, just, I'm already, we've got the kid out of bed. Okay. And she's dressed and her hair is made and her teeth are brushed. And then the breakfast is gross. So I'm like, I know the breakfast is gross. I'm sorry. Oh, I wish we had a different breakfast. 2 minutes later, she's eating the breakfast. Literally. It's just that helping her know she's loved, she's safe. And then she can say, okay, I'm not gonna have breakfast this morning. Now she has rational thoughts to have for herself and she can eat the breakfast. And
So,
we'll talk more about the validation piece. And
so just a story about this, because I think
do you have any questions? Would we know?
there's no
Okay,
question.
Okay.
What I find fascinating about all of this brain science is that, the classic scenario of a child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket or in the mall or something, and the parent just can't get the child to do anything, right? You're screaming, you're threatening, whatever, it's not working, right? Why?
Calm down right now. Okay.
And we understand now why it doesn't work, because you're having a rational conversation with an emotion.
Maybe you're having.
Maybe you're trying,
Maybe
right,
you're
right.
irrational. Maybe you're also
So-
emotional at this point.
And what's fascinating is when you practice nurturing the embrace, the hug, the emotion, it works. So one of our children, one morning, as children are growing, they like to have their potato chips and their granola bar and their other chips and the other chips. And that's like a very nutritious breakfast. So
No, lunch.
I'm sorry, lunch. Well, yeah. So Dena comes into the kitchen one morning and opens up the lunch, and there's no sandwich, there's no fruit, there's no vegetables. So she said, well, you're going to have to take, you're going to have to take out some of these snacks and replace it with some vegetables. And this particular child that was it. That was a total emotional break. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to school, right? We've all been there. And I realized that this child is just not totally in this emotional state. So I actually picked up the child and hugged the child. I was actually surprised that the child didn't push me away. They actually melted into the embrace, and I walked with them into the other room, and I figured I'm just going to sit with this child until they're done crying. It took less than a minute. Child was finished crying, walked out of my hands, went into the kitchen, swapped out the lunch, went and ate. They were happy. It was like, wow, that actually worked. And I think the more we do this, the more we see that it's just the way we operate.
If my older kids were listening to this, they'd be like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You did all the same, like, you're going to listen to me right now. And if you don't take this, you're never having cookies, and you can have cookies tomorrow if you take fruit today. And, all the bribing and manipulating and coercing, been there, done that. Sometimes I still do it.
So let's, well, just briefly from a Torah context, and I meant to put in another line here, which is the Nefesh HaSichlis. So the foremost book of Chabad philosophy is called the Book of Tanya. Sometimes it's called the Tale of Two Souls, because in a general sense, we have the animal soul, which we called before the reptilian brain, or the emotional, the limbic brain, which really both belong to more animalistic, instinctual kind of wiring. And then we have the godly soul, which the intellectual soul belongs somewhere in between. But fundamentally, there's some great teachers out there today that really spend a lot of time taking these teachings and helping us see today's science, today's brain science in these teachings. And so we've got the animal soul, which we all are born with an animal soul, right? That's instinct. It gets exacerbated. The reptilian brain learns these processes by continued nurture, negative or positive. In other words, if we're creating safety in challenging situations, so then that brain gets wired one way. If we're not creating safety, or if God forbid a child is experiencing continuous trauma, so that brain gets wired in a different way. The fire alarms are going off way too often. And then we have the intellectual brain that has the capacity to analyze what's going on, not in the same moment, but in a calmer moment, has the capacity to analyze what's going on. And then we have what we might call conscience. In Tanya language, it's the godly soul, it's the moral soul, it's directing us to live higher, to live more purposeful and more meaningful.
What can I learn from this?
What can I learn from this? Right, right. So the one thing that really captured me in all of this, really just building on what we just spoke about before, is this idea of the animal soul. Sometimes, and unfortunately, even the way we were taught some of these teachings is the animal is like, it's like a gross thing, like it's indulgent, it's self-interested, and it's not a bad thing. It's just an animal, right? And if any of you have a pet at home, you have a puppy or you have a kitten, or you may have a big German Shepherd, it's still an animal, right? And what does the animal need? It needs a little nurture, it needs a little care, it needs to be fed, it needs to, and when it's not nurtured and fed, it acts out, right? And how do you take care of your animal? You hug it. So I like to think of my animal as a little puppy. Okay, whatever animal you have, right? It needs a little nurture, and it's not a bad thing. Sometimes animals act out, and sometimes the animal within us, not that God forbid we're animals. There's no part of us that's an animal. We're human beings. We're blessed human beings, but we have the instinct within us that has animalistic tendencies, and based on the brain science, really operates in that way, and it needs nurture. So we're not bad because we have self-indulgent desires. We're not bad because we even have desires that maybe are not holy. That doesn't make us bad. That just means we have a part of us that is driven to self-interest. And we have the tools to redirect it and to guide it. So if that's true within ourselves, we have the capacity to help our children, both in their moments of when they're in their animal soul, when they're in their limbic or reptilian brain, to when they're in their prefrontal cortex, or to help them develop, because children's prefrontal cortex takes years to develop, but we can empower them.
So that's, I just want to make 2 points. The interesting thing is that it says that your prefrontal cortex is not developed until your early 20s. And even Judaism says we don't even get our nefesh elokos, our godly soul, until our bar and bat mitzvah. So even the Torah recognizes that this comes into our body later. And the other thing I was thinking about was that paradoxically, that if you ignore the animal soul, so if you tell it it's unnecessary, and I'm not going to give you sleep, and I'm not going to give you self-care because I'm just going to be a do-gooder, and I'm just going to push myself. What's it going to do? It's just going to bang on that door. But when you give it, all it needs is a little water and a little drink, and that dog is going to stop pounding on your door. It's going to stop whining. It's going to stop moaning, right? So paradoxically, when you give into that animal soul in an appropriate way, you give it safety, security, the emotional, you give it what it needs emotionally, then it's going to stop bugging you, really. And then you can actually engage with the world with that willingness and that prefrontal cortex.
I think that's a really important point vis-a-vis something we touched upon at the beginning about the self-judgment, right? If we recognize that we are human beings as parents, and we're not always going to do everything right, that we also have an animal that sometimes gets triggered, we don't carry such judgment around ourselves, and that it's like at the end of a long day, you need to go to sleep. You need to get a good night's sleep. You need a good meal. If you don't get a good night's sleep and you don't eat a good meal and you don't exercise, you're not going to be able to perform just as an adult in the world, right? that's because we all have an animal soul. It needs nurture. And sometimes when we don't get the nurture, and the reason why sometimes we act out as parents is because of the wiring we have from our own childhood, right? And our children can trigger us because we're still human beings, and we have to work through that in order to show up for our children in a healthier way. But let's move away from the self-judgment, because we're just human beings that need the same kind of nurture and self-care in order to be there for our children and so on. Yeah.
Okay, so just some other points here is really to be able to get on board with a lot of this. We have to really change our thinking. Okay, so people like to say old thinking versus new thinking, but I just think that if anyone had old thinking and it was, coercion, manipulation, behavior modification, all these like very technical terms, I just think it was miscommunicated. I don't think it was really the appropriate way necessarily ever. I don't think that what we're talking about is new age. I just think we have a deeper and better understanding of
But we see that
works.
this stuff is rooted in teachings that are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old.
Right. So I just want to, anyone who, I think people get allergic sometimes to thinking like, oh, you've discovered the next shiny penny. I don't believe that this is a shiny penny. I don't believe that conscious parenting is a shiny penny. I don't believe that more gentle parenting is a shiny penny. I think it's really what the intention was, what Torah's intention is. It doesn't always look that way, especially when you look at God and different things. But I think that there's ways to peel back. And, we were given Hasidic thought how many years ago? 300 years ago, we were just given the secrets of the Torah. So a lot of this is just emerging for us to understand now. So if you just changing your language from how do I get him to how do I help him, you are going to come up with different solutions. So when you're going to say to yourself something very simple, how do I get my child to brush their teeth? You're going to think of coercive, manipulative, behavior modification things to do. When you say, how can I help my child? Just those words, how can I help him? How can I get him? If we just change that language, we are creating a new neural pathway in our own minds, and it literally will find another way to get your child to be more willing. And usually it's going to come with connection because it's helping, right? So I'm going to help my child. How am I going to help my child get out of bed? If I'm going to get my child to get out of bed, well, I'm going to bribe them. I'm going to make a chart. And sometimes we need these things. I'm not saying we don't, but just know that's the pathway you're going. It's very cold. It's very distant. It's very modification-y. It doesn't work in the future. It is going to be, it's not coming from within. It's coming from without. And we could, that's another discussion about all the outer, if we want our children to work on their own parenting, they have to be comfortable with their insides. Like we have to be comfortable with our insides because that's where we're getting here. So, but if you say, how can I help my child get out of bed in the morning? You're going to say like, oh, they probably want a hug and they probably want me to rub their back. And can I get you shoes? Could we prepare your clothes the night before? Like you're going to come up with solutions that help them. Okay. So the new thinking is relating, connecting, attachment, the 4 S's that every child needs, which is safety, security, to be soothed, and to be seen. And I just want to kind of touch on one thing here. I don't know, did we talk about unconditional love at all later?
No.
Okay, so there's a big buzzword today, which is unconditional love, unconditional parenting. Unconditional parenting actually is from, what's his name? He coined it, Alfie Cohen. He's amazing if you ever read any of his books on parenting. But there's safety and security come before unconditional love, because if there's nowhere to put the unconditional love, then all your unconditional love in the world is not going to help your child. So if there are no boundaries in your home, if there are no expectations, if there are no values, if there are not real things that are containers to hold this unconditional love, then all your unconditional love, you have a lot of kids who grew up with their mothers loving on them all the way, but they'll tell you there was nothing to stand on. There, you can't, if you're an amorphous blob and you're just unconditionally loving on your children, you're not, it's a misnomer to think that that's all they need. Of course they need unconditional love, but they need something to put that unconditional love into, and that is Safety, security, being soothed and seen is how you give a child safety and security, but that is just something I want to touch on. And then I want to talk about the pitfalls. So I have two here, but I want to talk about a third one. And this is something that I come across very, very often. Parents will say to me, but they need to be respectful, but they need to speak nicely, but they need to be, they need to be on time, but they need to have good good organizational skills, right? We have all these, and what I call that is the moral high ground, okay? So we were all raised on a moral high ground. Some kind of, either we got it from our grandmother, our grandfather, our mothers, somebody gave us, I mean, tell me if you don't know what I'm talking about. There was some like moral high ground, like this place we ought to be. As Jews, we have a very strong moral high ground, right? We have the Torah.
Should.
All the shoulds, right? We should get up we should respect our elders. We should get up for an older person. We should not be lazy. There are so many things we should do. Okay, true. But now, I think of, what's her name in The Little Mermaid, and she says, I want to live where the people are. Okay, so where are the people? The people are not in the moral high ground, okay? Where do we actually live? We actually live right here with 2 feet on the ground. So the moral high ground is one day your child, you will give them the tools to hopefully one day choose that moral high ground, and that is their choice. Everyone can be on their moral ground on their own. But if you are so connected to the moral high ground, you are disconnected from your child, because it is such a thin rope to you are in your fear brain when you're in the moral high ground, because all you can think about is, oh my goodness, they're not going to be organized. They're not going to be polite. They're not going to be liberal enough. They're not going to be welcoming. There's so many things that scare us on the moral high ground. So we're actually disconnecting from our children because we're in our fight or flight or fawn or one of those modes, and we're not really connecting. So my invitation is for everyone to get off the moral high ground. Your children are going to do all those things like disrespect, and they're going to talk back, and we're going to model for them differently. That's what we're going to do. We're going to model for them differently. We're going to let them know what our value system is, but getting caught up in it is going to be disconnection.
Good. That's passionate.
Okay. And yes. Okay. Then the other pitfalls
I'm gonna speak
are,
about this.
go ahead. What?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll speak about this a little bit. So, 30 years ago, therapy was for people who were sick, right? Crazy, people who had real problems in life. Today, therapy is for everybody. You got your personal trainer, you got your personal doctor, your personal wellness coach, you have a therapist. It doesn't mean that you have to spend every week at your therapist, or that there has to be a lifelong endeavor. But this may sound a little sacrilegious, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1986 began to encourage that we incorporate a mentor into our lives, that everybody needs to have a spiritual mentor. And really, what is a mentor? A real mentor is someone who you're comfortable sharing who you are with, your struggles, and they can give you perspective. Now, they're not necessarily trained in dealing with the various different things that we need, but at least from a spiritual standpoint. As we said at the beginning, if we're not doing the self-work, we're not showing up in the best possible way for our children. When we change ourselves, when we make the reason why the parenting is so different is not because it's hard to pull out a whip. It's not because it's hard to scream at your child. It's not because it's hard to mete out punishments. That's not why parenting is hard. Parenting is hard because inside here, there's all these conflicting thoughts, and we want to do things different. There's a little child inside that needs nurture and care, and we can't do it on our own. If you have a good spouse, God willing, you have a good spouse, you have somewhat of a mirror to help you at least recognize that there are issues that need to be addressed, but we all need a therapist. Work it through. Hopefully the issues that all of us are dealing with are not major issues. Some people do have major issues, but all of us, if we're alive, we grew up in a home, and that home has certain things that influenced who we are, that give, or other circumstances of our childhood. We need to do that work. We need to have the self-awareness, do the self-growth, And then we can show up in a healthier way for our children. Speak about self-regulation.
Yeah. So, a therapist or somebody to put that mirror up to you to reflect. And especially if you are getting triggered, if your children are triggering you constantly, it is worth your while to discover what is going on. So the self-regulation piece is the piece where if we want to be able to help our children get out of their emotional brain and their reptilian brain and their survival brain, they're going to be in that brain 2,700 times a day. And if we go there with them, then they have no idea how to learn. We are co-regulators for our children. The only way they're going to learn about regulation, and maybe I don't come from a generation where anybody taught us how to regulate. There was no intentionality around that. There was a lot of, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You're amazing. You can do this. We don't cry. We're strong. And all that is great, whatever. But the piece of actually, now I just want to kind of back this up a little bit, because I don't want to assume that everybody even knows what their nervous system is, because I know people that will get a phone call that tells them that they have a flood in their basement, and then and they're out of town, and then wherever they are out of town for a wedding, they continue about their day, and then they're with their children on vacation, and they're yelling at their children. They don't even know, they didn't even stop for a minute to know that the flood in the basement gave them a stomachache. They have a headache. They're not even stop. People don't even stop for a minute to make the connection between their mind and body. Or they got a piece of news. By the way, pink slips are going out in the office. They file that somewhere, and they have they have a tightening in their chest all day. They come home and they're short and they're angry and they're mean, and they didn't even make the connection that, okay, so the first step.
It doesn't even have to be that dramatic. The coffee, they ran out of coffee that morning.
Right. Okay.
Okay, that'll be
exactly.
more noticeable because you didn't have your
Okay.
coffee.
Okay, so whatever it is, your kid was really rude to you, and you have a lump in your throat the rest of the day, and you don't know why. You're just in a sad mood. So the first piece is really recognizing that things affect us in our body. Like sensations happen. We feel sad. We feel stomach aches. We get tight chest. And to sit with that, even if you sit with it later, but to go back to it and say, oh, this morning, my kid said that to me before school. I felt like a horrible person because I sent my kid off to school telling me I'm the meanest mommy in the world. That doesn't feel good. And to just sit with that and notice it, watch it, say hello to it, don't judge, whatever it is you need to do with what happened that morning, because otherwise it leaks into everything. So this is the beginning of understanding your nervous system and then being able to regulate. And sometimes it means, getting that message that you're fired and having, what are your self-regulation tools? Do you breathe? It says that breath, that is like the first thing we teach the kids in preschool, because breath actually moves you from your lower brains into your higher brains. It gives oxygen into your brain so that you can move along. But where do we know this from? It says that God blew into Adam's nose in order to give him life. So breath is life. If we want to give ourselves life constantly, we have to be constantly breathing deep, intentional breaths. We re-give ourselves lives. We reinvigorate ourselves. We take ourselves from a place of stress to a place of calm. Sometimes it's, if you know of a tapping method, my kids all talk, Ma, you want to tap it out? My kids already know that I might need some more regulation tools to get myself calm. And even them saying that to me makes it funny, hopefully, or I snap at them and I say, I'm fine. But just knowing that there are tools, and then further than that are things, mantras that we tell ourselves why things are happening, but that's not for this class right now. So it's really knowing what your triggers are, knowing about self-regulation, and making the mind-body connection for yourself. And then of course you're going to be able to make that for your child.
Just repeat, but it's bringing it home. Go ahead.
Okay, so what do children need? They need connection, attachment, attunement, or you're going to get fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You're going to get those responses if they're not getting the connection, attachment, and attunement. Yes? Everybody, thumbs up? Okay.
So hopefully we have a clear picture around that now.
Right, those are the
based
responses to this. So if your child is doing any of those things that are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, you're probably Yeah, so in Covey's terms, creating space between impetus and response, it's actually not Covey, it's actually, what's his name who said it? Man's Search for Meaning. He said that everybody has a
Viktor Frankl.
stimulus and response, and that is where we have free choice. But in order to have that moment, we need to be regulated. Okay, so
So some of this we touched on already, but
Okay.
let's just go through it again. So how do we get this done? How do we get this done from a parent? So we talked a lot about the science, talked a lot about some of the Jewish sources. How do we get this done? Dena started talking about some of them. So inner work on the adult's part, that's the therapy, the sensation, recognizing your sensations, self-regulation, ask all the questions.
right, so like, why am I feeling like this? What happened? Pausing, noticing, and just to be able, you have to have awareness. You have to have a real awareness. And maybe you can decide tonight you're gonna have an awareness, but there has to be an awakening where you're saying to yourself, like, I'm not just going through my day without pausing to notice that I have bodily sensations that are in response to stimuli that enter my brain.
So this
Okay?
next one, I think, is really important because we can all relate to it in so many aspects of life, right? When we wake up in the morning, we have a framework about our lives, about how things are supposed to be, right? And when they're not lining up, we go to the fear place in our head, and we don't necessarily consider it fear. We rationalize it. Like, if I have to do this, because if I don't do this, then what? Like, play out a scenario. You didn't pay the bill. So you completely freak out that you didn't pay the bill. Okay, you should pay your bills on time, but it's not the end of the world. Even if you didn't pay your mortgage, you got 30 days before in Georgia they'll come after you. I mean, you have time, right? Huh?
I thought it was 10 days.
10 days, okay, with some grace period. But anyway, the banks don't want it anyway.
Yeah, but
But-
here we're talking about fear around our children and their future.
Right. What I'm saying is that when we go into a certain mode, well, it's also about, I mean, I can speak for myself. Like, I'm always like, I got to get the next thing done. So my child wants to spend more time with me. And I said, but if I spend the time with them, what's going to happen to that? And I say, okay, what is going to happen to that? Like, let's play it out. What is going to happen to that? And I'm not even talking about like which is more important, right? But even so, like Dena was saying before, like if the kid doesn't eat all their breakfast, well, you got to finish your breakfast. I mean, I have an aunt who said when the kids are hungry, they'll come and eat, right? Here we have to, like, we're stuffing the greens down their throat. I'm not saying it's not important to have greens, but if it's not working, stuffing it down their throats, what's the fear around that? What are we afraid of? Go ahead.
Okay, so, yeah, so I think that a lot of our triggers come from fears because we're afraid that they won't, sometimes you'll see parents pushing their kids to, love their grandparents or play with their cousins or be friends with certain people. And all of that is around fear. Like maybe you didn't have friends or maybe your family wasn't close and you just want so we have these fears around how we want to raise our children, or maybe they're not going to be, they're not studying, they're not going to be smart, they're not going to have a good job because I feel like a loser. So we have to remember where these fears are coming from. And just, even if you don't know, you don't have to know where the fears are coming from. But if you are in your fear brain, you're not in your thinking brain, and you're not raising your child to a good future. So you're actually paradoxically really screwing it up for your child because you're so fearful. So it's letting go of the fears and dealing with what is.
I want to add something.
Yeah.
Even when the issue on the table is really legitimate, for example, maybe not your 4-year-old, but your 12-year-old is coming home from school with bad grades, right? And you're frustrated with that, and you're disciplining them, right? Because you have some fear around the bad grades. Now, it doesn't mean that the child should be getting bad grades, but the way you're dealing with it is coming from a place of fear, the attitude, instead of coming from a place of relating and trying to understand why the kid's getting bad grades and having a conversation with them and discussing it with them, instead of like, so whenever we're operating from a place of fear, where the communication is not about connection. It's about control. It's about coercion. It's about manipulation. It's not healthy. And some of it has to do with this fear of, okay, if this doesn't get fixed now, what's this child going to become? Okay, well, let's play that out. What is going to happen if this particular behavior doesn't get fixed now? Is the child, we joke around the house, don't worry, they won't be doing that under the chuppah. You know, chill out a little bit. It's not everything that's going on right now, and most of the things that are going on are not becoming lifelong patterns. They're just kids being kids.
Right. So on that is that we do have to deal with what is. So let's deal with the 12-year-old who's not getting good grades, but not because I'm fearful about his future. So do you hear the difference in that? I am dealing with the good grades because he should be getting good grades. So he's not wasting his time in class. So he feels like a productive human being. So he's respectful to his teacher. So he's not, I mean, there's a million reasons for today in 7th grade to be getting the good grades, but it has nothing to do with my fear of that or that.
And the difference is when you approach it that way, we're approaching it from a totally different angle. Why is the child not getting good grades?
Right, because now you can think
what's
you're
really
not in your
going
fear
on with
brain.
them, right? It's a smart kid. Maybe they need some extra help. Maybe there's something else going on at school that's making them not focus on their studies. Maybe there's something they're feeling disconnected at home, right? But as soon as you move away from fear, you're able to deal with what is instead of whatever's going on over here.
Right, right. So we want to move away from catastrophizing, fear, worrying about the future, and then guilt, because you know, guilt is just, it's like a drug. You know, it just, you feed off of it, and it distracts you from the real issue because you're just so busy feeling guilty. I just got off the phone actually with a friend of mine. Her father died, and she's like, it's all my fault. I'm like, okay. She's like, he was doing well, he was on his own, and then I invited him, and because I invited him, he fell and he died. I was like, honey, wow, that's making you feel good, I guess. You know, you feel very powerful, you know, taking all this blame for it, and it makes you feel like, wow, I can do this, I can kill my father. But no, you know, like, you didn't kill your father actually. So we take all this power, and we have, and when we're coming from a place of catastrophizing and guilt, we are going to react in a powerful way. And when we're being powerful, we're going to have all the power. And then we're going to do all those things that people in power do to people less powerful than them. And that's never going to be good parenting. And that's not going to lead to connection or love. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we, because I think that I really am relating to that, like the fear of if they don't do this, then like all the domino effect. How do you not be afraid for their future if they're not paying attention in class, or like that 12-year-old not getting?
So I was going to say that this is a great place for this idea of holding space for two truths. It is a shift, right, within ourselves. We can oftentimes be very black and white thinkers, right? It's either this or that, and it's a shift that we have to talk ourselves into or talk ourselves down from. That two things can be true. Good grades are important, but we don't have to approach it from a place of fear. And sometimes we have to do that work. Again, ultimately, it's about the inner work, recognizing where the fear is coming from and trying to move away from the fear to who's this child in front of me? What do they need? It's hard work. It's hard work. But if we can hold space for both of those things, then we can focus on the child instead of what's going on inside of ourselves.
So it's moving away from their future to the grades right now. They need to get good grades right now because it's good for them right now. You're going to get the same outcome, which is the better grades, hopefully, and hopefully the better job or whatever you think that's going to lead to. But it's how you're approaching it, and it's your mindset. And when your mindset is different, you're actually going to be dealing with the child in front of you, not with some pretend future child that doesn't even exist. So it's really dealing with the here and now. Is that you're actually gonna, so it's not changing, it's not changing the outcome, but it's how you're dealing with it. It's the attitude you come to it for. I just want to say holding space for two truths is also very much from the Torah. It says in the Tanya that we can be in two places of our heart at the same time. We can have we can feel two emotions at the same time. I said we couldn't be in our fear brain and our thinking brain at the same time, but we could be in our emotional space. Like we can hold, first of all, we can be in two emotions at the same time, happiness and sadness, in the same way as we can be in our brain. We can say like, this is true and this is true, and we need to bridge those two truths. Okay, so modeling, there's a lot of different times I've been seeing this lately where people would come to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask him for questions. And, you have this like super enthusiastic father, and he's like, so tell me, like, how do I make sure I have really good, upright, on the high moral, ground children? And the Rebbe's like, have a happy home, be happy. Like, it's really about like the connection piece and the modeling piece and doing it yourself. Like, you want your kids to be morally efficient, you be morally efficient. And really, I was actually thinking about this recently. I had a grandmother who was, she was impeccable, like everything about her Judaism was impeccable. Her morals were impeccable. She was a Holocaust survivor and really just a high caliber woman. Talk about like somebody I could aspire to live up to. But I was thinking like the things that she modeled and never spoke about, I actually do. The things that she like harped on me about, I don't do any of that. I really don't. Like, she talked to me about like the beds being this way and you have to set your table this way. I'm like, set your table however you want. It's fascinating. Like, and the things that she never said a word about, but she just did quietly to herself, those are the things that I, interestingly enough, do today. So it's something to think about, just the modeling piece and not having to talk about it. Like, your kids see what you're doing and you could tell them, I always, I just love brushing my teeth. It makes my teeth so white and they're clean. Like, you just talk about yourself, and then instead of like dragging them, and then we're brushing our teeth now, but like the whole drag and gravity, not necessary.
I want to address your question again. Because two things are coming up for me. One is,
So her question was,
how do you, when you have real issues like good grades, how are you able to navigate that when it's actually something that's very fearful for you? So I think the modeling is important. And what I mean by modeling is, how are we living that same thing in our own lives? In other words, not vis-a-vis our children, but vis-a-vis ourselves. If a person is living with a lot of anxiety around stuff that's going on around them, right? You're modeling anxiety and you're living in that anxiety place. So it's just showing up there, and it's showing up in terms of your relationship with your children. So this is not a question about parenting. It's a question about you. And I'm not necessarily suggesting it, but how do we deal with anxiety when there's stuff going on in the world, right? Whatever method we're using for that, we really can apply in the same situation with our children. So for example, just for fun to play this out, what is going to happen if your child doesn't get good grades? Play that scenario out, right? That's one of the tools for dealing with anxiety, is play out your fear around whatever you're being anxious about. What's going to happen? And if that happens, and if that happens, and if that happens, what's the end scenario, right? What's the end scenario? We unfortunately, we've just lived through COVID, and there's a lot of people who had a lot of fear. Now, some of the fear at the beginning was definitely correct, and some people carry that fear, and some people legitimately needed to have concern around it because they had some serious underlying medical conditions. But there are a lot of people who just lived with fear. And you know what's going on with their children today? Those children have a lot of fear in their lives now. And the fear that the child has and the fear that the parent had wasn't about the child, it was about the anxiety out there. And a lot of us have anxiety out there. We have to navigate that. So I'm bringing that back to the idea of modeling. Navigating that modeling is through the self-work again.
Modeling the navigating, not navigating. Modeling the navigation. Right.
It's about the self-work.
Right.
Another point here is about empathy now, guidance later. This is also very helpful, because even when a child needs guidance, right? Child needs guidance. And that's really part of our role as a parent, is to help give them tools, right? But in this moment, the guidance is not appropriate, because now the child is in their reptilian brain. Right now, they need love. They need connection. That's what they need right now. And it doesn't mean like okay, I'm gonna hug them for a minute and then I'm gonna give them the lecture. No. Right now, there's a rabbi, actually your uncle, Rabbi Manis Freeman, he taught this to us years ago, that when a child does something that needs instruction, oftentimes it's best not to give them the instruction in the moment. Just notice it, come back to them a day later. Imagine what it does for your child when you come back a day later and say, by the way, I saw how you said such and such to your sister, to your brother, or whatever it is. Really, you've been thinking about that behavior for a whole day? That conveys to the child that this behavior is actually really important. But if you try to do that when the child is in the fight with the child or is crying because this one picked on him or that, that message is gone. It's not going anywhere. And not only is the message gone, but the empathy is not authentic either, because you're just getting through the empathy so you can give the guidance. So you don't have to throw away the guidance because you're giving empathy. Just put it on the back burner until the right time.
I just want to say the reason we don't wait is because it's hard. Like we want,
We're fearful.
the child's, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the child's in front of us right now, and maybe we're fearful, we're going to forget, but we want to be efficient. Like this is efficient to deal with it in the moment. But paradoxically, again, it's not, because you're telling your child, blah, 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 blah. Like they're here. What is that? Like they're hearing nothing. And of course we're dysregulated because we can't calm ourselves down. We need to say it right now because it hurt us and it upset us. But that's why we need to be regulated, so that we could pause, stop, wait, and write it down, make ourselves a reminder to speak about it tomorrow or the next day. It's harder. It's hard. Like this is not easy. It's much more efficient to yell at your child in the moment and check it off your list and say, I just taught my child about patience and being nice to their sibling and being respectful because I did it. I taught it to my child. No, you didn't. You taught your child nothing. So
This should really not be tactics. These are like mottos.
Okay.
But anyway.
that's okay. These are just, so I'm just gonna, these are a few like just mottos that I have in my head that have helped me. So number one is breathing, reminding yourself to breathe deep breaths, and just, you cannot have enough deep breaths. Pause. Okay, I forgot one of them. Another one is oops. Being able to say to your child, oops, I want to try that again. Like, I don't like the way I just responded to you. Turn around, like physically turn around, say, you know what, could we try that again? I wanted to say that differently. Oops. Q-tip, quit taking it personally. It's happening in front of you. It's not happening to you, right? Like your child is not out to get you. They're having a tantrum. It's not about you. It's happening in front of you.
I would say not only when it's a child reaction vis-a-vis the parent, but even children within themselves, right? Two children are fighting with each other. It's like, oh my gosh. No, they're not doing it to you. They're dealing with it. It's
You're
happening in
making
front of
my
you.
life miserable. No, they're not. Okay. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. So that is, looking at, that goes into the tip of the iceberg. You're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, which is the behavior. Underneath that is emotions
What's
and
the-
thoughts and feelings.
The
And
duck?
right. You see this calm, or the opposite is you see this calm, placid child, and underneath they're like, like a duck is moving their feet. So sometimes your kid we just don't know. We don't know what else is going on for our children. But if we're gonna,
I will say that one thing that's coming to mind is that when there is a good connection with a child, so even if on the outside it may look like the child's calm, if the child is dealing with turmoil inside, first of all, you'll be in tune to it, but also the child will feel safe and comfortable to talk with you about it. So it's not something that shows up 10 years later, but if there's a connection there, the child's going to feel comfortable to discuss this with you because you're a safe place to have that conversation.
well, you're a safe place if you've connected with your child, if you don't
Right.
freak out on your child for other things. If you're a freak out parent, like even if your child comes home with poop on their shoes, if you're a freak out parent, then their neural pathways tell you that their mom freaks out a lot. And or if kids could test you, they might tell you something that their friend did. And if you freak out about what their friend did, they might be wanting to know, is my mother going to freak out by what I did? This is something I'm really not so great at, I'm just working on, is not giving solutions. And I don't mean like, when your kid's very sad, Brene Brown, I think, says this, like, you want to turn on the light, right? Your kid is scared of the dark. You want to turn on the light. Sit with your kid in the dark for a little. Let them see that the dark is safe. It's okay to be with their emotions. So there's one level of like, your kid comes from school, everybody's picking on me. Oh my God, that's so hard. My teacher was mean to me, or my friends, or I had a rough day, or whatever age your kid is. And you're like, that's really sucks. But so that's one level of being able to sit with your kid. But then there's like, your kid comes and says really dumb things to you. And you think that they've discovered a new way of being, right? And they figured out life, and you want to be like, no, that's not how it works. That's where I find myself like having to bloody my tongue. Like, I want to correct my child and tell them the truth, because I've lived so much longer and I know the truth, and you cannot grow up believing these ridiculous things about people, about life. So it's also in those moments of just being like, oh, is that how you see it? I mean, this my daughter taught this to me recently. My 10-year-old, we went out with her, and I asked her, I asked her some personal questions. I said, so are you da-da? She goes, if that's what you want to believe. She says to me, yeah, mommy, it's my new, I learned that if you just, you don't really want to tell people, you just say to them, if that's what you want to believe. Like, okay. Okay. Kids will do well if they can. So if your kids are not doing well in whatever it is, socially, emotionally, academically, spiritually, they're missing skills, because our children want to do well. They want to connect. They want to do well. People want to flourish. That's what we've been put in this world to do.
Does if they can also mean if they have, because it's not necessarily that they're missing skills, they're disconnected within themselves. They're experiencing loneliness and stuff like that. So
Right. So
if they can is, yes, if they can with skills, but also if they can find their own equilibrium.
right. So either they're missing regulation skills or
They're feeling disconnected.
emotional skills. Right. They're missing some kind of skill to do well in that area. That's the positive intent you see your child with, is always going there. Now, I guess I could add there is also, or we could talk about this next week, is just the way you think about your children affects them so strongly. Our thought patterns about our children, having positive intent towards them, and even teaching them positive intent. Like, when something happens between them, and saying, oh, she probably, and even if the kids like slapped the other kid in the face because she's, angry, but, oh, she probably didn't realize, because, and even if you're going to get the reaction like, what, you're just training your child to always have positive intent. And then they're going to start seeing that same positive intent in others. And what you're doing is, you're teaching your child to view the world in a nicer, kinder way, but you're also, when you have positive thoughts about your child, you're actually, our brain can change reality. This is scientific, actually. They did a study on, they taught people piano that had never learned piano before, a very simple song. And half the group, they told them to practice on a piano, and half the group, they told them to practice it in their heads. And then they came back next week. The people who had practiced the notes in their heads knew it the same way as the people who had practiced it on a piano. So just our thoughts create neural pathways that are really significant and important. So having positive thoughts about your child will create that environment for your child to live up to that.
So this is the end of our presentation. We have a few questions that were submitted we're going to address, and if anybody else has some questions, we'll take them. And we invite all of you to text, email. We have some additional things we'll talk about next week, but if there's some other overall area,
I don't have nothing else to say.
if you have other areas that you want us to address, we're happy to do that next week. But let's address a few questions that came through.
Okay, so I'd love to learn more about behavior modification through positive reinforcement. So I think that we kind of address that here, which is that behavior modification, if you want to see willingness in your child, which I guess I'm going to translate behavior modification as willingness, then you need to connect. The positive reinforcement is to give your child connection. If you are going to connect with your child, constantly show them that you're there for them, you're going to see behavior modification. my question is about encouraging my 4-year-old to do his morning and bedtime routines. He's always wanting to play and do other things that drag it out. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm constantly coaxing, cajoling for the things that could perhaps be less of a struggle, like brushing teeth, changing clothes. Okay.
This question is part of it as well.
A bedtime is brutal because I have no sense of bedtime. No matter what we try, it doesn't seem to work. Got any tips how to solidify bedtime? So a lot of bedtime and getting our kids to do like very time management-y type of things is a lot of what works is that connection piece, which is making things fun and making them silly and giving them choices and like, you know, like, let's see who's going to get into the bathroom first. And I'm going to brush. Wait, do I brush my teeth like this? You know, just there's a lot of things that your kids can anticipate. And then again, you're building those neural pathways in their brain. You're doing it fun with them. And then they're going to grow out of it. Soon they're going to just do it themselves. And you're constantly connecting. If you're doing it with them, I think a lot of it is about our expectation. Like we expect bedtime to just fly and it's just not going to fly. So we're going to be disappointed if we have this expectation that our 4-year-old is going to manage bedtime by themselves and I can sit on Instagram. It's not going to happen. I don't know what to tell you. You know, we have to put in the time for it. And maybe I do it one night, my husband does it another night. So it's less cumbersome. Maybe I do 20 minutes, my husband does 20 minutes. If that, we could do that. Like, so maybe there's some other ways to make it less tedious, but these are really, really heavy, intense years, but they do pass. Like they're not forever.
It's not forever.
And it's just to maybe make a little sign in your bathroom. I won't be doing this forever. They won't be asking me to help them at bedtime under their chuppah. I don't mean to be making light, but it's about our attitude towards our children. And it's about wanting it to be like chick chock, I'm done. It's not, they're going to feel that. They're going to feel that energy and they're going to just push back against that energy and they're going to make you crazy. So if you dive in, hands and feet, and you say like, I'm here for the next hour, you're going to be there for an hour and 10 minutes, maybe, because you said an hour. So alter your expectations, but connection and make it silly and fun. And what are we looking forward to? What's our book? Who's choosing the book tonight? I'm choosing the book. Who's choosing the outfit? You know, are we brushing with this toothpaste? Are we brushing with that toothpaste? Like there's lots of little gimmicks to just make it fun and connected.
And I would say like, you know, maybe not with your 4-year-old, but with your 10-year-old that want to stay up all night, right? So after you've done the bedtime routine and you've hung out with them, you've read a story, you've schmoozed with them, whatever, and they just don't want to go to sleep. So you can, I think it's fair to negotiate with them, and we do this with our twins,
Our terrorists.
with our terrorists, is that you know, like Friday night,
Don't negotiate
Yeah.
with terrorists, right?
like Friday night, they can actually stay up in their room. You know, we have a little Shabbos lamp and they can read. And sometimes they'll stay up late and sometimes they won't, but they know that they can have that let out sometimes. And even sometimes during the week, if everything is calm and, you know, they're in bed and they're reading, they're not going to stay up all night. They're human beings. They got to fall asleep at some point. You know, so you can have that flexibility. Yeah.
So taking out the punch from it, like taking out the rigidity.
It's not
Okay,
it doesn't have to be a power
It
struggle.
seems like it's really hard for you to go to sleep at this time. What could we do? How many more minutes do you need? Okay, you want 25, I think 15. Okay, somewhere in the middle. Laying with them really relaxes them and calms them. Try meditation. Some kids really do really well with auditory meditation at night. There's just different, you know, kids.
Some
like
people
again,
need touch. You rub their back. It'll help them fall asleep.
I have great memories. My father used to lay with me at night and tell me stories till I was, you know, at least 8 or 9, to talk to me about my day. So that was really special, like, you know, laying with my father. So I think that, you know, being open to those kind of, but again, you have to be present for that and you have to have the time and you can't be dreaming about scrolling Instagram.
These last 2 questions here.
Okay.
We can do that.
Okay, so next week, teens, tweens. I think the connection piece is so huge with, somebody asked about teens and tweens. I think we could talk about that next week, and resiliency, because some of that is just going to dovetail into a lot of what we spoke about tonight, which is the outcomes of this kind of parenting, what the bang you're getting for the hard buck you're putting in right now.
Anybody that's present have any questions or comments that they'd like to share?
Wondering, like, the inside of to my kids, especially the older one, will ask why. Every single thing. Why is the grass green? Why is there music going on right now? Why are we going to go pick up so and so? Why? It's just a barrage. Why?
You know what my mother used to do? My mother had a kid like that. The question is, if your child asks why about everything, and it's super, super irritating. My mother used to say to my brother who did this, she used to look at the clock, she'd say, see what time it is? For the next 15 minutes, you cannot ask me why. And she like taught him how to tell time that way, because he would look at it and he'd be like, okay, now,
Sometimes I say,
um,
like, like it's time to, school brush your teeth. Why?
Right.
Sometimes I say, because I love you.
right.
And they kind of know, like,
I mean, I
it's just-
think,
it's just like,
Going back to what you guys were saying, I'm wondering if it's a need for connection.
yeah,
Because
I-
she'll ask why for things that she knows the answer to.
need for
So
connection.
maybe she's asking why because she doesn't know how to say, talk to me
Right.
about
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. I think that's very, very much on target. And some children are curious. They really do want to know, right? They really do want to know. It's,
you might be curious,
but
It's
but-
annoying.
so the key here is to work on relating. In other words, like we said early on, if you're trying to get them to versus help them. So just because a kid's asking why doesn't mean every question needs an answer, or that it needs an answer right now.
Right. It
But-
sounds like you're really curious about a lot of things. How could we help you find these answers? Because I don't even always have them. And give them some tools like, or this is, these are the questions I'm able to answer for you. Or when I'm driving, I like to listen to music. Or, do you want to write down those questions? This child can write already, right? Do you want to write down all those questions, and we'll choose 10 of them that we're gonna answer. And then that's connecting time. And
You're right.
and
You
spending
can say,
time
we can
together.
take time. We can go out for some tea and we can talk about your questions, right? You have to test some of those things to see what's really going on and be aware if maybe that's what the child is actually looking for, is the connection. Or they're maybe just really curious.
We tell her, put it in the parking for right now, and we'll come back and we'll move the cars later. And she told us this week that her parking garage was full.
Hmm, Yeah.
I said, okay.
a lot of questions.
She needs somebody to spend time with her
She's
to,
valet parking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to whatever she does needed. It was about what parents get super triggered.
Mhm.
You run upstairs to the chief. Parent feels the need to answer also right away. Want to, the response is the more caring response, and it's this pressure on yourself to also answer right away. And but like if you said like I'm upstairs, I'll be down in a second, I would keep talking, being able to like give that pause before answering, because I think also just work on the parent.
Right.
it's so interesting though, like, my brother-in-law, whenever the phone rings, she answers the phone.
Right.
And so like this one daughter is like, oh, the phone's ringing. And like my wife are like, so?
I think it's a generational thing though.
I don't know.
Should we say goodbye to her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta answer the phone.
We're going to say goodbye here, and then we can continue in a second.
Thank you.
again, we invite everybody to send emails, text with your questions or requests, and we will regroup next week.
Yeah, if there's anything you specifically want to cover next week, please just let us know. You all have my email, I think. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Let's see what the comments are.